All right. Hello again. Good to be back. Our midterm is all done. We have made it through and are on to our to the second half of our course and content, and everything that we are going to be talking about is about to really shift gears. So through the first half of this course, we focused on kind of the nuts and bolts of special education, of IDEA and the inclusion classroom, the concepts of the continuum of services and the IEP meeting, those kinds of things. The second half of this class, in a very, very quick way, is going to be covering some of the actual practices that we see in in inclusion classrooms, also in self-contained classrooms to some degree, but definitely in inclusion classrooms, to support kids from a variety of standpoints. So we will be today talking about classroom management strategies. Next week, we're going to be talking about general academic strategies, and then we'll kind of finish off the semester. It's already kind of almost at the end, with some more content specific strategies. So how do you support kids in reading and math, in social studies, that kind of thing. So the focus really shifts from the procedural now to the pragmatic, where we actually start looking at what are the things that I as a teacher can physically be doing in my classroom on a day-to-day basis to help my students with disabilities who are in my classroom. All right. In terms of activities, there are going to be a few activities that go along with each of these groups. I'm going to give myself kind of one more week to see where we stand in terms of field experiences. If we do any field experiences this summer, it's going to be video based. So you would be watching a video and be able to write a reflection on that. I have yet to find some really good videos that I like that kind of qualify for field experiences for this class, but I'm always continuing to look, and we'll see what we come up with. All right. So today we are going to be starting with talking about classroom management strategies. And I think I had mentioned previously that a couple weeks ago, I did a training with a Max Charter School on campus. And one of the things that struck me was this lecture is a lecture that I've given a dozen times, while at Nichols, if I've done it once. And for a lot of students who are in this class, it doesn't feel so practical. This is not how you teach reading. This is not how you teach math. This is not how you teach reading or math to special education students. We have already had a classroom management class. Many of you have already had 313. But as I reviewed this material, or these concepts that we're going to be talking about this week and next week with the Max Charter School teachers, it amazed me how much feedback they got, that we got, of things like, I remember this from undergrad, but tell it to me again. This was the stuff that once you get out into the field, it doesn't matter if you are a self-contained teacher, an inclusion teacher, or a regular ed teacher. These are the things, these are the strategies that help you manage your classroom and help you teach, period, end of story. And it really reinforced to me the importance of understanding some of the basics of what goes into classroom management, what we're looking at in terms of classroom management, and that we need to just be spending more time on it. One class, a full class dedicated to classroom management is not enough. And we have a lot more to do to get teachers prepared. So I hope if you've already taken 313, I hope that you got a lot out of it. We're going to talk about it today. We're going to talk about it some more next week. And then in 487, we're going to spend even more time on it. So that's either in the fall or a year from now, depending on who you are. So what is it that we want to look at when we are looking at classroom management? The challenge with classroom management is that for the most part, your teachers end up being kind of stuck in between these two concepts. There's one, the classroom or school behavior management system that is generally in place in most schools. There's a classroom component to that school-wide system. But beyond that, teachers are given a lot of freedom. So what do I mean by that? I mean, there are, almost every school has some sort of what's called a PBIS, or Positive Behavior Intervention Support System, in place. That can be a clip up and clip down system, that can be a conduct system, that can be a reward system where you're earning a quarterly access to a quarterly party. It can be any one of those different things. And if you don't get any red conduct marks over the course of the 9-week period, you get access to a pizza party, that kind of thing. That concept is inherently, the concept is accurate, the practice is very, very flawed, but where we get to even more trouble with that is that there's typically a classroom within classroom face for those types of systems. So whether they are physical tokens that can be handed out in the classroom, whether they are the actual clips that you're moving up and down, whatever it is that the school is implementing, there is a component of that exists within the classroom. What we have to understand about those systems is that if you think of our RTI structure, the 3-tiered RTI structure, those systems are a tier 1 school-wide system. They're not intended to be classroom systems. They're not intended to provide behavioral support for your tier 2 and tier 3 kids in a classroom, let alone at the school level. But they are everywhere. And what ends up happening is teachers say, okay, well, we have this classroom management system based on the school management system, so that's all I need. And I don't have to modify anything because this is here for everyone. It should motivate everyone. Well, what ends up happening is that tier 1 system, just like any tier 1 system, is going to be successful for 80% of your students. That's typical, that's fine, that's great. 20% of the school, that means that they are not going to be successful on that system. They need some other system that is there to support them. Well, what happens if that 20% of the school is misrepresented in your classroom, one way or another? Maybe you have very few of that 20% in your classroom. Maybe you have an outsized proportion, and 50% of your classroom falls into that 20% category. That would mean that 50% of your class is not responding to the only classroom management system that you have in place. And that's a major concern. If you are an inclusion teacher, chances are most of your special education students are not going to respond appropriately to that school-wide Tier 1 intervention. In addition to that, there's going to be a subset of the non-special education population that is not going to respond to that Tier 1 school-wide intervention. So now you have this greater number of students in your classroom who are not responding to the only support that the school, the only behavior management support that your school is providing. In order to combat this, you as your own teacher need to have your own classroom management systems set up for not just your special education students, but for all of your students in your classroom, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. School-wide supports are not supposed to be classroom management tactics. It is school-wide, not classroom-wide. So independent of that school-wide system, whatever it is, and to whatever degree you intend on using it, you also need a classroom management system in place. Luckily, there are any number of different ways for you to implement those classroom management strategies. Some of them are very easy to implement and don't take a lot of effort or materials or setup. Some of them are much more intensive and individualized and take constant monitoring. Some of them are kind of in between, all right? Even within these systems, though, there is no one-size-fits-all system, with one exception. Every teacher should end up with their own little modifications to their own system, both between each other and year to year, depending on the needs of the students that you actually have in front of you. You cannot set up one system and say, this is going to work for every student that is going to come in through my classroom, for all of my teaching career. You have to be flexible, and a good classroom management system allows for that type of flexibility. So what are some of the different strategies or tactics that we can have in place in order to address classroom management? Well, every class will have positive reinforcement. I'm going to talk about that today. I'm going to come back to that in much more detail next week, but every class is going to have positive reinforcement systems in place for both academic and behavioral support. We are going to have token systems in place. We'll see what those might mean or might look like. We will have what's called some public posting systems, where students are able to show their achievements and by doing so motivate others, hopefully, to do well as well. And then we are going to have this group at the end that looks at much more of like a gamification of classroom management overall. So we're going to have what are called yoked contingency game boards. We're going to have group contingencies, and we'll have some self-monitoring options as well. All right. Hang on 1 second. All right, so our first strategy is positive reinforcement. And I've realized that I've erred in putting this slide up here without a bit of a more technical definition of what positive reinforcement actually is and means. And we're kind of relying on a layperson definition of that, which is a mistake. So ignoring what's on the slide for a second, we need to go off of this definition. So positive reinforcement is and means, and if it does not fit this definition, it is not positive reinforcement, all right? So positive reinforcement is when a stimulus, something, is added to the environment after a behavior occurs the effect of which is to increase, maintain, or increase the frequency of that behavior in the future. So that's a lot of language. So let's talk about a couple of different examples. I'll say it again. When a stimulus, when something is added to the environment, that added is the positive, after a behavior occurs, the effect of which is to increase the frequency, maintain or increase the frequency of that behavior in the future. So by that definition, let's say a child does something that we like, and we say, good job. In the future, if that child continues to emit that behavior, and we keep saying good job, and they keep doing that behavior, and we keep saying good job, and they keep doing that behavior, then that saying good job is functioning as a positive reinforcer. It's added to the environment after the behavior, and the behavior maintains or increases in the future. So that good job is functioning as a positive reinforcer. If a child does something and we say good job, and they say, don't say anything to me, and they no longer do that thing in the future, then good job did not function as a positive reinforcer. That does not mean that positive reinforcement doesn't work. It means that saying that vocal praise, saying good job, did not function as a positive reinforcer. By a technical definition, but that praise, that good job, actually functioned as a positive punisher. Punishment being something that decreases behavior over time. If you've taken 382, this is either a review or reinforcing those concepts, but this is a very important idea in the understanding of classroom management. Very often, teachers will provide things that they will give after behaviors occur, but those things will have no effect on the future behavior of the student in that classroom. Those are rewards. When you provide something to someone afterwards, there's a chance that that might be reinforcing, but only to the degree that it actually maintains that behavior in the future. If I run 10 miles and someone gives me $5, that $5 is not going to make me more or less likely to run 10 miles again in the future. Similarly, if your child gets an A on the test, and you give them a pat on the back, it's unlikely that that pat on the back is going to be what increases the likelihood of them getting an A on the test in the future. All right? We need to make sure that we are providing ample reinforcers as opposed to rewards in our classrooms. All right? Reinforcers are not rewards. Reinforcers are not bribes. These are things that are different than reinforcement, which is defined by the effect on future behavior. Okay? Tokens, as we'll see in a second, that are traded in for specific items are really good reinforcers because they allow for access to many things that we as a society potentially want, or we as our children potentially want. As adults, we earn tokens and we trade those tokens in for things that help reinforce the behaviors that allowed us to earn those tokens. What am I referring to? I'm referring to our paycheck, all right? We emit some number of behaviors. We get a paycheck, which is our tokens. We trade those tokens in for goods and services. Access to those goods and services maintain our working behavior. It might not always be the same job. It might not always be the same behavior. It might not always be the same effort. But there are all these behaviors that we can emit to earn different numbers of tokens to trade in for different numbers of things. All right. It's important to understand how our financial structure works as it relates to positive reinforcement, because our kids are doing the same thing. Their job is to go to school. They earn things for going to school. And whether we use a token system or not, things come, reinforcers come as a result of going to school. What tokens do are tokens give a visual analysis, especially for our young children, not a visual analysis, I'm sorry, a visual representation of the things that they do not yet understand that they have access to. Reinforcement does not always have to be material. Reinforcement can be social. In fact, when most people say that they don't like using positive reinforcers, even though they have a misunderstanding of what positive reinforcement is, what they mean is they don't want to use tangible reinforcers. They want to be able to rely on social reinforcers and what some people often call intrinsic reinforcers, or the want to do something in and of itself. There's issues with that word, but not important for right now. Basically, what they are saying is, I want a child to do their math because they want to learn math. I want the child to read because they enjoy reading. I want the child to want to be around me because they like being around me. I don't want them doing these things to earn an M&M. And that's a valid thought process. It maybe not be accurate wholly, but it's understandable where they're going for. What we have to understand, especially when we are talking about our students who have disabilities, is that we all want them to get there, but they might not be there yet. And if they're not there, it's our job to teach them to want to get there, not to yell at them until they do get there. Very few, if any, people do academic things more independently because they were yelled at. Very few people do academic things more because they were shamed into doing it. We have to go through a process that allows our students to want to do those things independently. And that takes time, and that takes work, and that takes a systematic process of reinforcement. And it might start with tangible reinforcement, but it will move to that intrinsic, that self-motivating access to reinforcers on their own. So our job with these processes that we'll go through now are to set up ways for students to access that reinforcement by doing the things we want them to do, such that eventually they will be able to do those things on their own. So, given all of that, we are going to start with our first positive reinforcer, which is social in nature, and that is praise. By the time most kids get to elementary school, adult praise is what we call a conditioned reinforcer, meaning that most children will want to behave in ways such that they will contact adult praise. That comes from child rearing, that comes from us being social creatures, that comes from all the experiences that we have prior to school. So when a child walks in the door and smiles at the teacher, we are likely to smile back and wave and say hi, and that is going to increase the chances that our child is going to come in tomorrow and smile and have a positive attitude, and start off the day in a really, really good way. It's not to say that just because we do that once or twice or 5 times, that our child is going to have a good day every single day that they will be at school. There are other things that are going to impact that, but it sets the tone. All right. When we do give praise to students, lots of things are happening in the day. We want to make sure we acknowledge students who are doing things early and often. We want to set the tone that this is a positive classroom, all right? Praise can be delivered or should be delivered up to or at least 4 times per minute. That might seem like a lot, but think about the type of classroom where you walk in and a teacher is constantly looking for things that a student is doing well, versus the teacher who is constantly looking for things that the students are doing incorrectly. In one, it's very welcoming, it's very positive, it's encouraging of risk taking. In the other, you have students who are afraid to move because they don't want to get yelled at, all right? So we want a lot of praise. I often say that my students knew that they were doing something wrong, not because that, not because I told them they were doing something wrong, but rather because they were not being told that they were doing the right thing. All right, so the absence of praise served as a correction for for students who were not necessarily on task or doing the right thing. That only works if praise is so frequent and specific so that those students know that there's something different happening if they are not getting that praise. Which brings us to the second tactic that we have with praise. I was, skipping over behavior specific for a moment, but we want to look at what's called vicarious reinforcement. So most of the time when we are praising our students, we are providing direct reinforcement or direct praise to those students. That is to say, we say, Kevin, I love how you took your pencil out and your paper out and you're putting your name on your paper. Cynthia, I love that that question that you asked. Thank you for raising your hand and asking such a wonderful question. We are directly praising the child for doing what they are doing in the hopes that they will continue to do that thing in the future. But it's not just that child that praise is having an effect on. If I have a group of students who are calling out and Cynthia's sitting there raising her hand and I say, Cynthia, what would you like to say? What would you like to add? Thank you so much for raising your hand. All the kids around her who wanted that attention, who wanted to be called on, but were not called on because they were not raising their hand, were just got a correction and just learned what to do by what we call vicarious reinforcement. So this is where you are calling out a student who is doing the correct thing with, one, the hope of reinforcing that behavior, but two, of altering the behavior of all those students who are not meeting that desired behavior. All right. Think about, again, what that process does to a classroom, your classroom environment. If I have 15 students who are calling out, I have one student who's raising their hand, I have two options. One, I can reinforce and call on that one student who is raising their hand and try to change other people's behavior, change other people's behavior so that I can say, oh, and I like how you raise your hand, I like how you raise your hand, I like how you raise your hand. Or I can correct each of those 15 students for not raising their hand and for calling out. One, you started off with just one student doing the right thing, emitted 3 or 4 or 5 approvals, and now everyone is doing the right thing. The other, you still probably got to everyone doing the right thing, but you didn't emit any approvals. You just emitted disapprovals for those students doing what they were not supposed to do. Very, very different classroom environment in those two scenarios. So often, I didn't talk about behavior specific. We emit a lot of behaviors over the course of a school day, right? From the time I give a direction to the time I tell you good job for following that direction, you've done half a dozen things. You got your notebook out, you got your pencil out, but it was the wrong pencil. You put that pencil away and you switched it. You fidgeted for a second, you talked to your friend, I came by, and you sat ready at attention, and I say, good job, thank you for having all your, or I just say, good job. I don't say thank you for having all your materials up. I just say, good job. Well, some of that was a good job, but you shouldn't have spoken to your friend. You should have got the right pencil out the first time. You shouldn't have dropped your book on the floor. When I say good job, all the things that you just did were reinforced. So that tells you in the future, I can, once I get the direction, I can talk to my friend for a little bit, I can do this, I can do that, as long as I get to this endpoint. If I, the teacher, say, good job, thank you for getting your materials out, that's the only thing that's been reinforced. That's not to say that my child isn't going to talk to his friend in the future, but I have not provided any specific reinforcement for that behavior. So that gives me the ability to correct that later on in the day, the school year, whatever it may be, all right? So we want to make sure that we give praise often. We want to be specific so that we are selecting the behaviors that we want the child to continue to emit, and we want to use vicarious reinforcement. Eventually, our goal is that the primary reinforcers for most of our kids will be social reinforcers, in the term of either vocal praise, non-vocal praise, stars, acknowledgements, any number of different things. But we want to make sure that our students are in a position where they will respond to praise as a reinforcer. At some point in your teaching career, you will come across a student where praise does not function as a reinforcer, where you give them attention and they will shut down, all right? In that situation, you have to recognize that that child is coming to the table with a different history than most of our other kids. And you don't want to start by heaping praise on that child. You need to find ways to make the insertion of praise appropriate. That is a harder thing to do. But for most of our kids, this is where we want to start. For beyond the level of praise, so even if our children are have praise as a reinforcer, and that is enough, we want to have some sort of backup, some sort of token system in place, both for them as well as for the students who are not yet at a point, maybe praise isn't punishing, but where it's not as strong a reinforcer as it could be, all right? This is where our token system comes in. Keep in mind, when you get a job, you are going to crave your principals, your administrators' praise. You are going to want to be recognized for the good things that you do. In most of our cases, without our tokens, our paycheck, we would not continue to come back, all right? Now, I'm not saying that without a token system that children would not come to school. However, the ability of a token system to condition, to make school a place that children really desire to be, thrive to be in, is going to be helped by the presence of this token system. If you have a child who has a harder time learning, if they do not contact a lot of praise, if school is hard for them, this is the system that will give them some, I don't want to say joy when they come to school, that's not the right word, but some motivation for being in a place that they don't necessarily want to be and behaving in ways that they don't necessarily want to behave in order to get things that do make them happy. So if I have a child who is struggling in school but really likes playing on the iPad, then I need to be okay having them earn tokens in order to play on the iPad. I recognize that they are not yet at a point where they are learning for the sake of learning. They are learning for the sake of getting on their iPad. That is an intermediary point, and that is okay. All right. So with our tokens, there are a lot of different ways of using a token system in a classroom. There are physical token systems. There are what we call permanent products or point systems. There's Class Dojo, which is electronic. There's no right or wrong way to implement a token system, but rather we need to make sure that we do something that's age appropriate for our students, meaningfully easy for us, and relevant to our students. I'm going to give you a few examples of token systems in a minute, but first I want to talk about, once we have the token system, what are some of the pieces that we have to have in place. So regardless of the token setup, we need to make sure our students understand how they're going to earn tokens, what they can do with their tokens, and what the process is for getting from earned tokens to earned reinforcers. All right. So starting off with how to earn tokens. The easiest way to establish how you earn a token or how you earn any sort of reinforcer is to have a set of classroom rules in your class. Have these posted, refer to them often. However, what we want to make sure is that our classroom rules are framed in a positive way. All right. And by positive, I don't mean good, sorry. But rather in terms of what a child should be doing, not in terms of what they should not be doing. So we want to say on our classroom rule, we raise our hands to get our teacher's attention, as opposed to we don't call out. Well, if I don't call out, there's all sorts of other things that I can do to get teacher attention. I can walk around the classroom, I can talk to a friend, I can throw something, I can do all these things that are not calling out that might get teacher attention, but it's not specified what it is that I need to do. When I have a rule that says we call out to get teacher attention, that can only be one thing. So if you throw something, you're not going to get my attention. If you talk to a friend, you're not going to get my attention. If you walk around, you're not going to get my attention. You have to raise your hand in order to get that attention. That is something that I can provide reinforcement for. All right. The older your kids are, the less specific you need to be with those rules. All right. You can start to provide reinforcement for organization. Organization encompasses having your materials, moving in a quick and timely fashion, knowing where things are in the classroom, so on and so forth, right? It gets to a point where you can be organized as a rule that is meaningful, but be organized isn't going to be a meaningful idea to a kindergartner. Might be to a first grader. By second grade, third grade, organization is meaningful, and you can start to have that as a rule in your classroom that is reinforced. Your kids have to know what tokens can be traded in for. A lot of teachers like to use things like prize boxes or raffles, or some of these lotto type reinforcement systems. And I really struggle with that. Imagine you went to the grocery store. You have your paycheck traded in. You've traded in for these dollars that now have physical meaning. And they say, all right, you're here. Go wait in line, and we're going to draw a name to see who gets to go into the grocery store. If nothing else, you're probably not going to go back to that grocery store. All right? You earned your tokens. You want to be able to trade them in. Now, it's different from tokens that you earned that you trade in specifically for the opportunity for that grand prize, aka buying a lotto ticket. But we don't put we're not forced to put our names into a lottery to see who gets to use their tokens. We choose to go into the lottery to get these special reinforcers, right? Same thing for your students. If you earn a reinforcer, you should be able to use that reinforcer, not the chance of getting a prize, okay? Have a lot of different possible reinforcers available to your students. Let your students know what those reinforcers are, because that will help motivate them. What happens if a child goes to, is really excited, goes to a prize box, and there's nothing in there that they want? Their motivation for that prize box is shot. All right? Prize box can be something. It can be a thing on there, but you want to have other activities that are known quantities, that are not left to chance, that your children are going to be able to work for. Now, these things don't have to be expensive. They don't even have to be I lost the word. They don't have to be consumables, right? Trading them to do a puzzle, to play a game, to read a book, to do extra math work. A lot of times you have kids that want to trade in to do math, extra recess, lunch with a teacher. Computer and iPad obviously are things that are probably going to be on there. These are all activities that should be available as potential reinforcers, and you should let your students know when those items are available and how much they cost. Should a sticker cost as much as the iPad? No, absolutely not. All right. Should 10 minutes outside cost the same as 10 minutes of iPad? Maybe, depending on how much those are functioning as reinforcers for your kid. We're in Louisiana. This is the opposite of what I would say when I was in New York, but 10 minutes of outside in May or August is not going to be as valuable as 10 minutes outside in January and February down here, right? I'll go play for 10 extra minutes when it's 45, 50 degrees, not when it's 95, 100 degrees. Okay, so we have to take things like that into consideration and adjust prices as a result. So have lots of different stimuli that can be reinforcers. Be very specific about how they're going to earn those reinforcers. And then have specific times and rules for trading in. We have guidelines about how and when and where we can use our money. Same thing for our students. If you're going to have a once a day trade-in, let your students know so that they can plan for that. They can monitor their own motivation for that. Many teachers don't like the concept of 1 or 2 times a day trading in, again, I'll take it back to your paycheck. Imagine you're only allowed to go shopping 1 day a week. You're only allowed to spend your tokens, your money, your hard-earned money 1 day a week. That's going to be a problem. Second, in terms of reinforcement, our children are behaving in a lot of different ways, a lot of different times. What happens if they have 4 really good days, they earned a ton of points, and they have a really bad day on Friday? You can't let them trade in. They had a bad day, right? But they have all their points. So if they don't get to trade in their points from before, then they have to wait a whole nother week. And who knows, maybe something always happens on Thursday night or Friday morning, and Friday is never a good day for them. All right, so we have to make sure that we are giving our students ample time to access those reinforcers, because life is hard and they deserve that time to trade in. Trade-in times do not have to be long. They do not have to be challenging to manage, but they do need to be present for your students. All right. Finally, couple of notes for our reinforcers. We have to make sure that we are finding things that motivate our students, not you. If you do a lot of preparation and by the beginning of your year, you make sure that you have a bunch of different things that you think your students are going to like, and then you get up there on day one and they're a total bust, change your reinforcers. If it doesn't work for your students, it's not a reinforcer, all right? Then it becomes a reward, and rewards do not have future effectiveness. Make sure that you are delivering your tokens with consistency, but not for every single response, all right? Or every 5th response or every 10 minutes or anything like that. You want to create a system where every response, everything that your child does has the possibility of reinforcement, but doesn't necessarily garner that reinforcement. Okay? Hang on a second. There is a lot there are decades of research that show when you deliver reinforcement on what we call a variable ratio schedule, means on average, every 5th response you provide reinforcement, that is going to be the most effective way of maintaining behavior over the long term. All right, I know I've taken my sweet time with this. Let's take a look at a couple of examples of what some different token systems might be able to look like. So here, these are kind of the more standard token boards that we are used to probably seeing, especially in special education, where you have a 5 or a 10 or a 15 token system. In here, we see an example where the tokens are pennies, are money. Here we have some dinosaur stickers in one. So in the money situation, we have where we're teaching a money skill, or we're giving our child an opportunity to learn counting pennies. In the dinosaur situation, we're using stimuli as our tokens that are reinforcing in and of itself. And then over here, we have an old VHS, a video cassette. In this situation, the VHS, the movie, was what the child was working for. So every time they put a token on, they saw that they were closer and closer to earning the thing that was there. So here we have 3 different examples of tokens. In each case, the token represents its own type of reinforcer, but never is the token the actual thing. They're not going to get 5 pennies. They're not going to get dinosaurs. They're not going to get the stickers of VHS, but they're going to trade these in for either backup reinforcers or the actual thing. These token systems are often used for younger kids, pre-K, K, or students that are still younger, but maybe a little bit older with more significant disabilities where they need that tangible to see that token in order to make contact with it. For our older system, or our older students, we can have point systems where our children are earning different points or point values for different types of skills or in different ways. So these should be flipped. I always say that and I never do it. There we go. The one on the right is a first grade beginning of second grade system where maybe you are earning tallies. Second. There we go. Maybe you're earning tallies, and that could be your first grade goal. All right. In this situation, you're earning those tallies for having your eyes on the teacher, asking for help, or knowing the questions or the directions. This one on the left, this was my second grade system where we had learning skills points, organization points, and citizenship points. So in these cases, I would give bundles of 10 up to maybe 100 or 200 points at a time. They earned an amount of points during their academic system periods, and then they had like bonus points out here. So in each of these cases, we have one sheet that accounts for a week of behavior. And there were rules and procedures and processes all around these. But this was how we delivered our points to all of our kids. All right, so a couple of rules on or overview on tokens and points in general. Tokens should be delivered contingently, meaning that if you don't see the behavior that you want to see, don't deliver the token. We want to make sure that the token is functioning as a reinforcer for behaviors that we want to see. Tokens should be delivered based on the individual needs of the students. Sometimes there are students who need more tokens or points. Sometimes there are students who need less, where it's not going to be meaningful to them if they're getting heaps and heaps and heaps. You will lose their motivation. Fair is not always equal. Fair and equal are not always easy. All right, we have to understand this is very, very individualized. Expectations should be clear. So should rewards, if you get bonuses for anything, that doesn't mean you're always going to see that. So should consequences. We'd never want to take points away if we can help it, all right? We should have other means for correcting behavior other than removing points. That's something that I'll talk about more in 487. And finally, if not most importantly, token and point systems should be changeable. They should be malleable. If it isn't working, change it so that it does. Okay, I'm going to stop there for today. I'll pick up with public posting and some of the other concepts next week as we move from that into academic strategies as well. All right, that's it. There is going to be an assignment that goes up this week. It is the token economy. Sorry, let me share my Moodle. The token economy assignment. I'm going to be editing it right now. It will be due next week. If you have any questions about it, let me know. Other than that, I will see you all next week. Bye.